The pistols were already raised when Pablo Escobar stepped into the room, calm and exposed. Knowing every breath tightened the room's loyalty, and that someone, somewhere, had decided he should not leave alive. The room smelled of coffee gone cold and sweat trapped in concrete. No windows, one door, too many men. Pablo Escobar stepped inside without pausing. No jacket, no visible weapon. His hands stayed loose at his sides as if he had walked into an office, not an ambush. The guns came up immediately. Not shouted, not dramatic, just lifted, steady, trained on his chest and face. Metal clicked softly. Someone's finger tightened. Escobar stopped exactly where the barrels wanted him to stop. He did not raise his hands. He did not smile. His eyes moved once around the room, slow, counting faces. Young men, older ones, familiar fear, familiar ambition. This was not supposed to happen here. One of the men spoke first, voice sharp with borrowed courage. He said Escobar's name like an accusation, like permission. The silence afterward stretched. No one fired. Escobar breathed through his nose, calm, almost bored, as if the danger had arrived late. "You're pointing those too high," he said quietly. No threat in the words, no humor either. The men hesitated. That was the first crack, not in the guns, in the room. Escobar took one step forward. The pistols followed him, shaking now, adjusting. Someone swallowed hard. Another man glanced sideways, checking if the others were ready to kill him, or ready to watch someone else do it. This was how power revealed itself, not in shouting, in who waited. Escobar stopped again, close enough now to see sweat bead on a man's upper lip, close enough that a bullet would ruin everyone's life in the room, including the shooters. "You called me here," Escobar said, "so speak." The leader shifted his weight. He had imagined this moment differently, louder, faster, bloodier. He had not imagined Escobar standing still, unarmed, forcing him to act first. The guns stayed raised. No one lowered them. No one fired. Outside, Medellín continued breathing. Cars passed. Radios played. Somewhere, children laughed without knowing how close the city was to tipping. Escobar understood the math. These men thought they had leverage because they had weapons. They had mistaken tools for authority. He leaned slightly forward, just enough to make the room tense again. "If you shoot me," he said, voice even, "you won't leave this city alive." A few men stiffened. One blinked too fast. Escobar let the words sit. He did not explain. He did not need to. Everyone in the room already knew the consequences. They just had not wanted to say them out loud. This was not about courage. It was about memory, about what happened to people who embarrassed him, about how long the cartel's reach really was. The guns remained up. The room remained silent. And in that silence, loyalty began to shift, not toward Escobar out of love, but away from the idea of killing him at all. No one had fired yet. That was everything. News did not travel openly. It never did. It moved through glances, through phone calls that ended early, through doors that stayed closed longer than usual. By nightfall, Medellín knew something had almost happened. Not details, not names, just the shape of it. Guns raised, Escobar cornered. A moment that should have ended differently. In the hills, radios stayed on low volume. In government offices, men reread reports without turning pages. In safe houses, lieutenants waited for instructions that did not come. That absence spoke louder than orders. Escobar did not rush to correct the story. He let it bend, let it scare the wrong people. Fear was more useful when it traveled without him. In the markets, whispers formed their own conclusions. Some said he had walked into death and out again untouched. Others said the guns had trembled. All agreed on one thing: he was still alive. That fact unsettled everyone. Enemies felt it first. They replayed the moment in their minds, imagining the shot they had not taken, the second gunman who would have fired, the escape routes that would have failed. They began to understand that killing Escobar was not an act, It was a commitment that lasted years. Politicians listened differently. A call came into a ministry office. No names, just implications. A reminder that stability was fragile and chaos did not choose sides. Papers were set aside. Meetings postponed. Neutrality suddenly felt safer than courage. In police stations, officers avoided certain streets, not because of orders but because instinct had sharpened. Something was shifting, and they did not want to be standing in the wrong place when it finished moving. Escobar remained unseen. That was intentional. From his house, he watched the city through others. He heard what was being said without asking directly. He learned who was nervous, who was silent, who spoke too much. He understood the moment for what it was, a warning disguised as an opportunity. They had shown him the limit of their nerve. He would show them the cost of testing it. Medellín waited. Not for violence, for direction. And in that waiting, Escobar's control returned. Not announced, not enforced, but accepted, the way gravity is accepted, only noticed when something tries to escape it. Loyalty arrived quietly, not all at once, not without conditions. Men came alone, one at a time. They did not knock loudly, they did not stay long. Each carried the same message, shaped differently. They were still with him. Escobar listened without interrupting. He sat back, hands folded, letting each man speak until his words thinned into excuses. Loyalty, he knew, was rarely pure. It was fear that had learned manners. One lieutenant tried to sound brave. He spoke of honor, of unity, of respect between partners. Escobar nodded once, slow, patient, as if hearing a child repeat something learned too late. Another said nothing at all. He only waited for Escobar to tell him what was required. That man stayed. Escobar began to speak less. He did not reassure, he did not threaten. He asked questions that forced men to explain themselves. Who raised the guns? Who hesitated? Who looked away? The answers formed a map. Some names he set aside, not forgiven, not punished, just marked. Those men would be useful later in smaller roles further from trust. Others he dismissed immediately. Their loyalty had survived, but only barely. They would spend the rest of their lives proving it. Fear did the rest. Stories started circulating without his help. Not lies, adjusted truths. How close it had come, how calm he had been, how the guns had not mattered. People remembered older stories too. The ones they tried to forget, judges, police captains. Rivals who had laughed once, then disappeared slowly, painfully, publicly. Escobar never referenced those stories. That made them stronger. He rewarded loyalty in small, precise ways, a debt erased. A brother released, a business problem solved overnight, nothing loud, nothing generous enough to look like gratitude. Just enough to remind them why standing with him had always been the safest position. Those who wavered felt it immediately. Roots closed, protection thinned, information arrived late. They understood the message without it being spoken. In Colombia, loyalty was not declared. It was demonstrated through survival. By the end of the week, the city had chosen again. Not because they loved Escobar, because they understood him. And understanding in that moment felt like the only form of safety left. The army entered the story without announcing itself. A colonel received a call meant for someone above him. He listened carefully, saying very little, writing nothing down. When the line went dead, he stayed seated longer than necessary, considering the weight of silence. Uniforms carried authority in public. In private, they carried risk. Reports began to circulate, unofficial, incomplete, but troubling. Armed factions shifting. Meetings aborted. A brief confrontation that should have ended in blood but had not. That detail bothered them most. Violence they understood. Restraint made them uneasy. Escobar did not contact the army. He did not need to. His influence arrived through intermediaries who spoke softly and asked nothing directly. They reminded commanders of past cooperation, of roads left untouched. of operations that had failed quietly without embarrassment. Money was never mentioned first. Survival always was. A general reviewed maps late at night. Red circles marked neighborhoods he no longer fully controlled. He imagined sending men in. He imagined the aftermath. Body bags, headlines, questions from ministers who would deny knowing him. Escobar had learned something over the years. Institutions did not fear criminals. They feared disorder they could not explain. Another call came, this one clearer, a warning disguised as advice. If the army moved too visibly, the city would react. If the city reacted, no one could guarantee what would follow. The commanders understood the implication. Action would escalate. Restraint could be explained as caution. They chose caution. Orders were adjusted, patrols rerouted, intelligence requests delayed. No official stand-down, just a collective decision to wait. Escobar remained unseen throughout it all. That mattered. He was not challenging the army. He was giving it space to retreat without humiliation. A quiet dominance that allowed men in uniform to tell themselves they were still in control. By morning, the tension had shifted. The threat of intervention faded into rumor. Soldiers stood where they had always stood, guarding what they could, ignoring what they could not. Escobar watched from a distance. He understood something the state refused to admit. Power did not belong to whoever carried the most guns. It belonged to whoever decided when they were used. Nothing exploded. That was the signal. Days passed without retaliation, without raids, without headlines demanding action. The absence itself pressed down on the city, heavier than noise ever had. Escobar let it breathe. He moved pieces without being seen. Routes changed hands. Debts were called in gently, then firmly. A few men lost access to protection they had taken for granted, not enough to provoke panic. Enough to provoke understanding. No bodies appeared in the streets. No messages were sent in blood. That restraint confused his enemies more than violence ever could. They waited for punishment that did not arrive. Every morning became worse than the last. Each sunrise carried the question, is today the day he reminds us? Escobar met with his inner circle in rooms that felt almost ordinary. Coffee, low voices, curtains half drawn. He spoke about logistics, about shipments, about politics. He did not mention the guns. He did not mention the army. That omission was deliberate. By treating the crisis as already resolved, he made it so. Men adjusted their behavior around him without instruction. Conversations softened when he entered. Disagreements ended faster. Even confident voices dropped half a register. Fear had settled into loyalty's shape. Escobar understood that domination did not require constant proof. Proof was expensive. Proof invited response. What lasted was certainty, and the city had become certain again. Those who had raised guns against him felt it most sharply. Their businesses still operated. Their families remained untouched. That mercy weighed on them more heavily than punishment would have. They owed him now, not money, time. Escobar watched Medellín return to its rhythm under his shadow. Traffic flowed, deals closed. Officials looked away at familiar moments. Order restored itself around him, not because he enforced it openly, but because no one wanted to discover what happened when it collapsed. He had not fired a shot. Yet the balance of power had shifted unmistakably back into place, quiet, firm, inevitable. The moment passed. That was its danger. Medellín returned to normal too quickly. Streets filled. Businesses reopened. Men laughed again, a little louder than necessary. The city pretended nothing had been tested. Escobar did not. He understood that moments like these did not end. They settled. They sank into the ground and waited to grow roots. He walked through his houses with the same calm as always, but his thinking had sharpened. The guns raised against him had not been an anomaly. They had been a preview. Power attracted pressure. Pressure attracted betrayal. The army had stood down but not forgotten. Politicians had stayed silent but not neutral. Enemies had hesitated but not disappeared. Escobar had won the moment. He had not solved the future. He began planning further ahead than before. More insulation, more influence, more distance between himself and the trigger. Control needed layers now, not just fear. Those who had stood with him were rewarded with proximity. Those who had hesitated were pushed outward, where mistakes were more likely, where loyalty could be tested again. The city learned a lesson it would carry for years. That Pablo Escobar did not need to shout, that he did not need to strike immediately, that when guns were raised against him, the consequences arrived later, quietly, and everywhere at once. The army commanders slept better believing they had avoided a war. The politicians convinced themselves they had preserved stability. Escobar knew better. What had happened in that room marked a shift, from reaction to inevitability, from survival to legacy. The shadow he cast over Colombia grew longer that day, not because of violence, but because restraint had proven just as absolute. And Medellín, whether it admitted it or not, understood something clearly. He was not finished.